No one remembers when they were born, but if this guy did, he would be grateful for having overcome so much pain. A shirtless man ripped off the arm of a vest-wearing citizen. He opens his eyes and walks around the place decorated with bodies, but if he were capable of remembering that, he wouldn't waste such a memory. One of the henchmen tells the shirtless man that they couldn't find the money. Suddenly, the little head of that citizen implodes. Now he doesn't have a little head anymore. The shirtless man tells his henchmen to search properly, because if they didn't find it, they all end up in the grave. Meanwhile, in the wreckage of that place, a young man is alive but badly injured. A system window appears in front of him, asking if he wants to go back in time. It seems that silence gives consent. His abilities will be reset. He clenches the paper in his hand tightly, and the system asks him to which date he would like to return. He wants to go back to the day of his birth, February 28th, 1985. Now there he is, in that tight space with no room for anything. The water had broken and the birth was imminent. The doctors try to calm the expected mother. The returned one now wonders if he did something wrong. He knew childbirth would be painful, but he hadn't imagined it would be this way. The doctors encourage the mother to push, but the trauma of childbirth is so great that the returned one believes he's going to be stillborn. His head feels like it's going to explode. The mother screams. The returned one is rooting for his mother, both wishing for that moment to end quickly. The longer the wait, the greater the risks for both of them. The system screen appears, congratulating him for overcoming that adversity, and as a reward, he received a characteristic of the same name. The nurse is holding the child, ready to hand him to his mother. The returned one is still contemplating the characteristic he received. At the moment when he can no longer fight, all of his skills and attributes will rise by one stage, and under this ability, you won't feel any pain. This is the characteristic that made the primordial evil even stronger. It's terrifying and can change the course of a battle, even if he loses consciousness. Now he has his first mission, which is to become healthy. The returned one is feeding and progressing in this challenge. The system missions began as soon as he was born. His vitality and perception rose by 1 point each. Additionally, he received 3 points. A new mission arises to stay healthy as well, a continuation of the first. The rewards are very generous and the missions simple. That's why the primordial evil was so powerful. It wasn't just his characteristic that helped him. 8 evils and 8 virtues. These were the 16 S-Class awakened, considered the strongest. The 8 loyal to the system were called benefactors or virtues. Those rejected by the system who succumbed to hesitation were called evils. Despite the nomenclature, they weren't that different when it came to pursuing their own interests. They were confronted for trying to monopolize the dungeons with the power they held. However, those who resisted couldn't do anything. Their strength was insignificant. The strongest among them was the first evil or primordial evil, the shirtless man from the beginning. While other awakened ones were confused about their own powers, the shirtless man was already in his perfect form. The returned one never imagined another awakened like him would emerge. But thanks to the shirtless man's casual talk about having memories from when he was still a fetus, something seems suspicious. The returned one is now a baby and is already babbling his first words. He wants to summon his status window. He manages to do so and appears before him. He has a characteristic but no skill points. However, he is content because he already has a window like that, even as a baby. The rewards could be astronomical. He is congratulated for becoming the first awakened. This is even better than he imagined, and because of that, he received a gift, the Challenger's Box. It appears before him, and the returned one can't believe what he's seeing. It's the highest ranked box and grants the chance to go back in time. He never imagined he could have one of those again. Soon he received the skill Odin's Fury. The returned one feels the power in his hands. That was the main skill of the 6th virtue, was just a cocky kid. With a simple gesture at his fingers, lightning would descend from the sky and annihilate whoever was nearby. The returned one can't forget the day when half his guild was wiped out with a single snap of that cocky kid's fingers. Now the returned one possesses a skill similar to that of the deities. Now he can finally face them. He needs to prepare everything before the day of reckoning arrives. The baby makes some sounds and his mother wakes up along with his father. She cradles him as he was already crying. The returned one can't hold back the tears. Perhaps it's his body unable to handle everything on his mind. But his parents comfort him, saying that besides being loved, they want him to grow up well and healthy. After soothing the baby, everyone goes back to sleep. The reason the returned one went back in time was to protect people. And in this life, he refuses to lose a single one, no matter what happens. On the phone, someone tells him that the guys were all talk and did nothing. Hyung says that he had already warned him about that. On the other end, the person confirms that Hyung really knows his stuff and adds that he'll invite him for a few beers soon. But the guy on the other side of the line gets distracted by something unusual. Hyung gets worried and soon the phone emits indecipherable sounds. Hyung imagines that his friend must have hung up in the middle of the call. He just wants to know why so suddenly. In front of him, tomato sauce is sprayed across his face. He finds himself looking at the body of a woman now lying on the ground. He's shocked, and around him several monsters begin to appear, attacking people. There's nothing anyone can do and the place quickly becomes a hecatomb, given the scale of the carnage. A voice starts telling the citizens that this is not a simulation and that unidentified monsters are attacking people. Hyung runs as an alert instructs those outdoors to find shelter inside buildings. A system window appears, directing Hyung to go to the test site. Other people start seeing windows, but they don't understand what's happening as they begin to disappear. This is the day of the beginning. Beasts poured out from the dimensional rifts, and the selected awakened were taken to the test site. Some stayed there for months, while others spent decades. Those who returned from the test site barely had time time to breathe before being thrown into combat with enormous monsters. The battles were brutal, and even the military was involved without success. Pushed to the limit, even nuclear weapons were used in an attempt to contain the invasion. But despite the destruction, nothing was resolved, and soon the country collapsed under its own weight. Meanwhile, the 8 evils and the 8 virtues used their powers to pursue their own interests. On television, news breaks that the Soviet Union and the Eastern European Economic Bloc did not attend the Los Angeles Olympics. The baby is watching the news and realizes that he's still living through the Cold War, a conflict led by fools in his opinion. This type of conflict will soon mean nothing. The baby's parents start doting on him because he is always so serious. It almost seems like he's hiding something, and he remembers that even though they are alive now, something unbelievable will happen soon. Therefore, he cannot neglect his preparations. While his parents sleep, he stays awake and struggles to get out of bed unnoticed. But his head is too heavy, and he falls. For a brief moment, he thinks he might have woken someone, but he keeps moving. This was a mission. He needed to take 10 consecutive steps to complete it. His vitality increased by 1 point, and he received 20 more. He completed the condition for independent growth. As a reward, he received a bronze box from the system. That was unbelievable. He had only received a box like this after suffering a lot inside dungeons. Growth rewards are extremely generous, and that only motivates him further. He is determined to eliminate the first evil even before the day of the beginning happens, because if that being who hasn't been born yet evolves at the same rate as he does, it will become a disaster for everyone. The baby relaxes outside, propped up on pillows while his mother works in the garden. Another mission appears. He needs to select a target and interact with them using 10 or more words. An easy mission, but he's unsure who to talk to yet. After all, if a baby just a few months old starts talking, it could be the plot of a horror movie. He looks at the calendar and realizes that Chuseok, the Thanksgiving holiday, is approaching. In front of him is Jai, who is still just a child. The adults advise her to be cautious around him because he's just a baby. The return knows she's only 4 years old, but she should be able to speak well. She's impressed with the little one because she finds him very cute. He, however, is a bit apprehensive. In the future, she will not only become very beautiful, but also a successful lawyer. She was the pride of her mother's side of the family, but she disappeared on the day of the beginning. Who knows, if he'd have trained harder instead of studying, maybe he could have saved her that day. Soon, the little girl hugs him, very happy. She says hello to him, and the baby responds. He asks her not to make a fuss because he can only talk to her. From afar, the adults watch the camaraderie between the children and admire both of their growth. The baby asks the girl not to tell anyone that he can talk to her. She agrees, and the mission he was working on is completed. Now he had completed all the tutorial missions. The return is surprised because he didn't know this was just a tutorial. He received the option to skip the remaining tutorials, but there were no programmed missions after that. Now the system wants to know if he wishes to skip the early childhood tutorial. Although he wants to spend more time with his parents, there's a chance he might end up scaring people. He decides to skip the tutorial because the real difficulty will still come, and he needs to be prepared for that day, the day of the beginning. The year is 1997, and some jerk with a wooden bat tries to hit a boy. Not only does the boy dodge, but he also manages to hit the guy with a solid strike. The boy prepares to land another blow, and this time he crushes the guy's nose with a punch. The bully falls to the ground, defeated. The crowd cheers. A guy comments that the boy has won again and has now conquered the Mapo district, even though the big guy had used a bat, which was of no use at all. He pats the boy on the shoulder and says that he's the real boss of Seoul. The boy brushes off his hand and says he's not interested in that. The only thing he wants is for strong opponents to keep coming his way. But the man tells him that this kind of thing isn't for him, as he has the potential to be a professional. If he gets hurt in one of these street fights, it could ruin a career that hasn't even started. But the boy insists on his stance and says that if the man doesn't find him strong opponents, he'll find someone who can. The man watches as the boy walks away and comments that he has a very intimidating look. In his status window, the returnee, Sun Hu, notices that his body is already that of an adult man. His strength and perception are above the average of professional athletes. He takes off his cap while massaging his neck. Looking at himself in the mirror, he notices that the wound on his face has already disappeared. Since he's awakened, he regenerates quickly. In school, he had an average height, but now he stands at 1.80 meters. The attributes he gained during the tutorial must have affected the childhood years he skipped. Although he has an exceptional physique for a 14-year-old boy, he would certainly fail in the test grounds. And since he won't have any more missions, he'll need to go to dungeons to keep leveling up. He thought of a place on a small mountain in a nearby town, just past Belford Roxo. There's a sealed rank F dungeon there, but for that to happen, he needs to make many preparations. He needs to buy the land and prevent unauthorized people from accessing it. He also needs to set up defenses in case a beast escapes. The mountain currently costs about 1.3 million, and considering the defense preparations, he will spend an enormous amount of money. In addition, there are hidden dungeons all over the world. It would be a huge task to monopolize them all, and for that, he'll always need to stay one step ahead. Since he knows the future, making money is a bit easier. Making a huge amount of money only takes a few moments. However, being underage, he won't be able to borrow a lot of money. At this moment, he needs someone to act as a proxy. A woman appears near him and notices that the boy is distracted. She asks him to focus on his studies. She wants to know what is diverting his attention. It was the teacher. He apologizes and realizes that school is not something he should focus on right now. The most capable person to act as his proxy at this time, he remembers from his past life when he was severely injured. He is being attacked by two men men who ask him not to hold a grudge against their subordinates. Sun Hu was the captain of these traders. They say that he would have done the same if he were in their shoes. He grips their spears and tells them they were incapable of resisting. To their surprise, Sun Hu attacks them. Now he is free from his attackers but still wounded. They were consumed by greed simply because they came across a box. A mysterious figure appears and asks Sun Hu if that had been the insignia of destruction. The man is relieved that he didn't get too close to it earlier. Sun Hu turns to the young man named Jonathan and asks if he will betray him as well. Jonathan reassures him and uses magic. What's left of the spears is removed from Sun Hu's abdomen. Sun Hu is surprised by Jonathan's mastery of the healing insignia. In response, the long-haired man says it's a simple repayment of a debt he owed. To those who receive, it's important to give back. Sun Hu is glad that even in the midst of chaos, there are still people capable of feeling compassion. The two continue walking through the dungeon, and the long-haired man asks if Sun really worked in finance and if he remembers the 1997 crisis. Sun says his country was deep in a crisis with the IMF, and he can't forget those days. The long-haired man apologizes as he had forgotten his friend is Korean. Despite how he looks today, the long-haired man used to be a trader. He made a fortune during the crisis that ravaged Asia. Jonathan says he used to be much more aggressive and that his nickname was the Wolf of Wall Street. He says being an awakened class A has no real value and that he misses the days when money was the only thing that mattered. Because of his high rank, the long-haired man attracted a lot of envy. Even so, he always got lost in nostalgic thoughts, missing the normal days of his life. Now, he must be around 25 years old and still in the financial market. He mentioned his nickname, Wolf, several times in the stories he told. That's also because the company he worked for had Wolf in its name. That was enough information for Sun to try to find him. Using the internet, the boy now wants to know if he can find the man who became his friend in his past life. He found him along with an email for contact. His expression still shows someone normal, without the indelible mark of stress he will carry in the future. Even though he looks different, Sun recognized him immediately. He then sits down to write an email to him, asking for his opinion on the Asian market. It was certain that he would receive a response. At that time, he also speculated that multi-market investors were planning to attack the Thai baht, but he wasn't entirely sure about it. And if Jonathan made investments based on what Sun knew, the stories of his immense prosperity wouldn't be exaggerated at all. The response came quickly, and Jonathan says that the baht isn't overpriced. However, Sun notices that Jonathan is acting as if he doesn't know much about the market. In response, Sun says that it was a good opportunity for someone to make money. He had finally captured Jonathan's attention. The exchange of messages was happening smoothly. Jonathan wanted to know who he was talking to and if he was affiliated with anyone or any company. But before answering, Sun provides even more information about the market, things he had learned in his past life, further piquing the trader's interest. Jonathan reads in disbelief that Thailand is just the beginning of the situation. Wall Street was in a strange position, and after reading the word capitalize, he assumes that the person he's talking to must also be in the financial field. However, he still doesn't know who he's speaking with, much less whether it's a single person or a group of people. He imagines that this could even be some kind of test, so he gives out his office address and contact number. Sun is pleased with the outcome. He had anticipated that Jonathan would respond this way. Jonathan feels that the person on the other side has all the answers and wants him to figure them out. Sun knows his friend has a remarkable intuition, but hopes that he has enough determination not to give up. Soon, there will be a declaration of war in the financial market, the attack of multi-market investors on the Thai baht. In 1992, it took about 50 days for multi-market investors to drive down the price of the British pound. Because of that, Wall Street speculators thought the same would happen in Thailand, but that wasn't the case. The Thai government resisted strongly and even fought back against the investors' attacks. The situation dragged on for 3 long months until Thailand could no longer do anything. And on July 2, after the market attack began, Jonathan contacted Sun to talk more about investments, sending him over 10 text messages. The topic was always the same: the profits gained from betting on the decline of the Thai currency. This was exactly what Sun had expected. In response, Sun sends a confusing message saying that Jonathan should now bet on the currency's rise. Jonathan would certainly be confused by this suggestion. This would undoubtedly prompt a quick reply, and moreover, Sun was preparing to make a proposal for Jonathan to establish his own investment firm. If he did, Sun would have an even better offer for him. As compensation, Sun would want 51% of the company. It was a bold proposal because Jonathan couldn't believe his informant would bet on the currency's rise after everything that had happened. However, it was this same person who had warned him about the attack on the country's economy. Sun hadn't said whether the investors would win or lose. So if the attack indeed started, there was nothing Thailand could do to prevent it. Even the United Kingdom couldn't withstand it when it was their turn. Jonathan's recommendations would only be given to very specific clients, and now his informant was suggesting betting in favor of the Thai currency. Not to mention, Sun was asking for 51% of a company that didn't even exist yet. Jonathan sighed, feeling like he'd been duped by a con artist. It was sad that he had allowed himself to be so deluded. He decided to step out of the illusion and alert his clients, but he hesitated before making the call because something had happened. Sun sent one last message asking Jonathan how he had concluded that the investors would lose, and that message held an answer. Sun hadn't said they would lose. The Thai banks had ways to protect themselves in the short term, which is why the currency would rise briefly. Jonathan, who worked in the financial market, realized that this conjecture conjecture was very plausible in reality. Speculators were betting that the Thai currency would fall around mid-May and were using that forecast to strengthen ties with key clients. If the currency didn't fall, what would collapse was their entire strategy. He felt anxious, unsure whether he should tell his clients about the possibility that the currency wouldn't drop immediately. He doubted he could succeed, because even if that were the case, he would be ridiculed. And sure enough, his boss said that the speculators were unanimous in their belief that the currency would fall. Only Jonathan believed in a Thai defense. The idea was so absurd that his boss suggested he should just leave because someone as foolish as him was a burden to the company. Jonathan knew he would be humiliated that way, but he tried nonetheless. He replied to Sun, saying that no one in his company was willing to take that path. In return, he got the suggestions Sun had previously given him to open his own company. But this leap of faith was too big for Jonathan. Giving 51% to a stranger was like handing over control of his future finances. It was hard for him to accept such a deal, but Sun wanted him to think carefully about it. The offer would only be available until the end of May. Jonathan wanted them to meet in person, stating that his office was open for such a conversation. Jonathan grew frustrated as the responses from his informants stopped coming. The pressure at work was building as he was the only one who hadn't yet secured a client to invest in the decline of the Thai currency. People were saying he was constantly distracted and perhaps even losing his mind. Even his colleagues wanted to stop supporting him. Time passed and Asian banks helped Thailand through bilateral agreements with $12 billion. The speculators were caught off guard and Thailand would breathe a little longer. Desperation swept over Wall Street as traders scrambled to reposition themselves. Jonathan had been right. The baht was rising more and more, an appreciation the speculators hadn't foreseen. Everyone was losing their minds as the losses were widespread. Finally, Jonathan realized that his informant had been right all along with his predictions. Now he felt a bit more confident in that mysterious stranger. A colleague called him, saying his boss wanted to see him. The boss introduced Jonathan to several major investors, men who were furious about losing money due to the sudden rise of the baht. But Jonathan realized his boss was introducing him solely to shift the blame for what had just happened. However, Jonathan had no intention of letting that happen. He took advantage of the situation to announce that he was resigning from the company and starting his own firm. And since he was leaving, those investors were welcome to contact him directly. The boss tried to salvage the situation, but Jonathan reminded him that it was his own suggestion for him to leave. Now, Jonathan asked if his former boss had any sponsors who would support his new venture. After all, Jones would certainly find one as he was the only manager who had predicted this outcome. The ex-boss cursed him, thinking he was too arrogant for having been lucky just once. But Jonathan countered, saying that Wall Street didn't need people to be lucky twice. Once was more than enough. He gathered his things and left the company. On his computer, he officially announced his resignation and was now ready to embark on his new venture. He needed to discuss the details with his future partner in a face-to-face meeting. Jonathan wanted to know where he should go to meet Sun. The young man replied and told him to come to Seoul immediately. Sun didn't feel particularly sentimental about returning to school. However, he was a little happy to see old friends again, even though he barely remembered them. The bystanders doubted whether he really belonged in middle school and spread rumors that he might have been held back. But considering how the future would unfold, it was better for Sun to keep his distance from his classmates. A commotion erupted in the hallway and the students rushed to their classrooms. The now empty corridor brought back unpleasant memories for Sun. He remembered that future city littered with bodies on the ground. He walked calmly, and a girl turned her attention to him. Her eyes welled up with tears, and when Sun looked in her direction, she hid her face, unsure of why she was feeling that way. Meanwhile, Sun was at the airport, waiting for the arrival of his future business partner. He held a sign in English that read he was awaiting Jonathan's arrival. Jonathan appeared among the crowd, and the image Sun had of him from his previous life, that of a warrior, flashed before him. Sun had to blink his eyes to see him as he truly was. They greeted each other. Sun remarked that Jonathan must be tired from the journey, and suggested they go somewhere quieter. Despite Sun's efforts to interact with him, it felt strange to see Jonathan so well dressed. On the other hand, the trader was impressed by the young man's fluency in his language. They sat down, and Jones wanted to know if they should just wait for now. He assumed that the informant was running late, though he was eager to meet him soon. Besides, the way the emails had been written was not ordinary. Then Sun revealed that he was the one who had been sending the emails. Jones was immediately surprised, as he hadn't expected to find a young man. Sun thanked him for coming such a long way to finally meet in person. Jones couldn't believe that the young man in front of him was the one responsible for their conversation. He was concerned, thinking that the boy must be at most 20 years old, and he had risked everything by coming to Korea. He questioned Sun, wanting to know if he had any idea what he had just done. Sun looked into the man's eyes and recognized the same Jones he had known in the future. Sun asked if Jones was in the habit of judging people by their age on Wall Street and told him that if he didn't like what he saw, he was free to leave. However, Sun had a gift for the guest who had crossed an ocean to see him. Jones took the envelope from the young man's hands. It contained several sheets of paper, which Jones began to read. The information immediately captured his attention. Stunned, Jones sat down as Sun requested. Sun explained that the crisis had been predicted as soon as the US government started lending dollars freely, believing that the 21st century would belong to Asian dominance. This is how the Asian tigers had risen, and what the multi-market investors had done was merely take a small slice of that growth. Now, Sun wanted to know what Jones thought of the report. Jones replied that Sun believed Thailand was heading for bankruptcy. Sun wanted to know what Jones had thought before reading the report. Surely Jones wouldn't have an immediate answer because that was the mindset filling speculators' heads at the moment. The first stage had been a victory for Thailand against the speculators. No one had anticipated that outcome. They had assumed it would be a quick win, and so it remained until July 2, when the Thai government announced there was nothing more they could do. Jones saw in the report that the attackers would win in the end, but something was missing. Sun told him that it wasn't Sun who would provide that answer. It was Jones who had to give the answer, and that answer would determine whether he would work with Sun or not. Jones realized that until he signed the contract, he wouldn't have access to the full information. He couldn't underestimate the boy sitting in front of him. Jones tried to argue that he had money and a solid work history. What could Sun possibly offer to compete with that? But Sun explained that it was a matter of opportunity costs and wondered what would have happened if he had chosen someone else. At the very moment they were losing, Sun was missing out on making money in the market. And indeed, Sun would have bet against the crowd on the rise of the Thai currency. The amount of money he could have made was almost unthinkable. Sun pressed Jones, asking if he had made up his mind yet, but Jones needed time to think. Sun was too much of a surprise for him. Sun sighed and told him he would wait for Jones' answer. He had until June 3. Jones was surprised by the deadline and asked why that particular date. They exchanged glances, and Jones noticed a specific point on the chart. He wanted to know if the date had anything to do with June 2, which was marked. Sun said they should calculate how much money they were losing during those days. Jones responded that it was impossible to predict market trends along with an exact date, unless Sun was God. But Sun replied that this was exactly what they were dealing with now. Jones was baffled that the boy even knew the dates. It seemed impossible. Sun sighed again, turned his back, and reminded Jones that he had until June 3 to make a decision. If he couldn't make up his mind by then, their relationship would be over. If this was the same Jones he knew, Sun was sure he would make the right choice. A few days passed. On the final day, Jones sent a message to Sun, asking if he had already thought of a good name for the company. Sun observes a worn-out and exhausted-looking Jones and asks if he is regretting his decision. Yes, Jones is completely regretting it, but there's nothing he can do now since he already signed the contract, and with the value of the report, he understands Sun's prediction about the crisis. However, he wants to know how Sun got the exact date for it. The boy says he arrived at it through calculations. Jones questions him briefly, but ultimately decides to accept the answer. Jones wants Sun to continue sharing his strategy, but Sun only says he'll reveal the ingredients. However, Jones insists on having the complete recipe. Sun simply sips his coffee without responding. Jones accepts that from now on, he'll have to trust the informant who once helped him. Now, Jones wants to know his business partner's name, as he still doesn't know it. At that moment, the boy formally introduces himself as Sunhu. Jones compliments the name, saying it sounds cool. He then suggests a company name, Jonathan and Sun Investments, but Sun prefers to keep his name out of it. Jones asks if Sun is shy or something, but quickly dismisses his own question, saying that he has $400,000 in funds. However, they need more money if they want to operate. Sun thinks to himself that this is all the man has, and even so, he's willing to give Sun 51%. He must be missing a screw in his head. Jones wants to know if the boy has any money to put into the business, but Sun responds that if he had money, he wouldn't have called Jones there. Jones understands, but is curious about why Sun chose him and how he found him. Sun replies that he found him through the website of the company where he worked. Jones is a bit frustrated, feeling like he was chosen randomly. Sun notices his disappointment and questions him about it. Jones admits he felt a little disappointed, but recognizes that opportunities arise in strange ways. They usually don't appear when you're desperate for one. They never come when you're desperate for them. Sun has heard Jones say this in his previous life. In his past life, Jones had planned to save up his points until he could open a challenger box. The reason he wanted to use all his points on such a box was to sell the items inside and live the rest of his life in luxury and excess. However, what he received from the box was a powerful ability, seen only once before in challenger box. The chance of finding an item from a rarer box in one of those is so slim that it's practically a miracle. Even with this miracle, Jones was furious because the thing he truly wanted didn't happen. The ability to come to a man who had already given up on everything. Sun had tried to persuade his friend, but Jones had been resolute in his desire for revenge. That's the last memory Sun has of Jones, and he later heard through the grapevine that Jones had perished. Jones then snaps Sun out of his thoughts, asking why he had such a sad expression and if it was because Jones referred to him as an opportunity. But now Jones is sure that Sun is his opportunity, and once is more than enough. He asks Sun to give him a solid calculation right away. Sun then asks if Jones will follow his directions, even if they involve risky decisions. Jones says he will without question. He was already all in just by coming to Korea. Jones presents a few more documents for Sun to sign and confirms if he brought identification, but Sun explains that the only way to verify his identity at the moment is through those 13 numbers, which are the equivalent of a social security number in the United States. Looking more closely, Jones asks if the first 6 digits represent Sun's birth date. Indeed, they do. He finally discovers how old the boy is. He's only 12 years old. However, Sun reminds Jones that they don't have time for him to keep getting surprised by facts about him. It was time for them to finally talk business. In the second week of June, from the 9th to the 13th, the market would experience a 10% recession. Jones asks if Thailand will declare surrender that week, but Sun says it will take a little longer. Jones then wants to know the significance of that week. Sun asks Jones if he remembers what he said at the beginning, and Jones recalls that Sun mentioned Thailand would only be the beginning. As soon as the market drops by 10%, fear will spread throughout Asia. Those attacking the bot will gain supporters. Jones asks if their ultimate target is Hong Kong, but Sun says no, it's Korea. Jones notes that foreign funds can't enter Korea without authorization, and indeed, they can't mess with the Korean currency market. But what will bring Korea down isn't that, it's the fear spreading across East Asia. As a result, the funds already present in Korea will withdraw. Jones finally realizes that a massive wave is coming. He asks if Sun wants to stop this out of patriotic motivation. Because if that's the case, no matter how much of a genius Sun is, he won't be able to swim against the tide. Sun knows that, and he says his only goal is to make money from this. The war will be funded by multi-market fund investors, but by the end of it, they'll realize who truly profited from it. Sun tells Jones that they'll operate with 50 times leverage. That was an overwhelming ratio that startled the trader. Even if the market dropped by 10%, the decline on the chart wouldn't be a straight line. It would go up and down, oscillating. Once fear spreads in the markets, the fall is free. Thus, the higher the leverage, the more crucial it is to know the right techniques for operating. With 50 times leverage, a 1% loss is actually a 50% loss. A 2% loss would be a complete wipeout. Jones wants to know if Sun intends to leverage the $400,000 at 50 times, and if he's doing it because he trusts Jones or because he doesn't care about other people's money. With that leverage, they would be moving the equivalent of $20 million. Both the profits and losses would fluctuate 50-fold. Naturally, it was extremely risky. However, Sun recalls that Jones was forged by doing this kind of thing, especially in October when the speculators lost to Hong Kong. As long as Jones sticks to the plan Sun gave him, the returns will be unimaginable. Sun asks his partner not to doubt him as everything now depends on Jones. This is also the only window of opportunity where they can operate with such high leverage. They must use this chance to build a large reserve for the next market crisis. Now from the 9th to the 13th, everything is in Jones' hands. He's anxious about what's to come. But Jones tells himself that he's going to show Sun what he's capable of. Planes fly over the Korean sky, and Jones steps off the aircraft with the same aura he had in Sun's past life. The boy even thinks he might have seen wrong because it looked like his friend was carrying a beast he had conquered, but he hadn't seen wrong. Jones really was carrying a prize. That prize was more valuable than mana crystals or S-class monsters. Jones says he's got 700 with him. Sun wants to know if he converted it all to dollars. Jones replies that he did and asks if the boy understands 700%. He grins, psychotic, because he had multiplied their capital by 700 times. In just 1 week, they had made 280 million. Now they were swimming in cash. Sun is on the phone with his mother, telling her he'll be spending the night at a friend's house. She only asks him to make sure all the doors are locked before she hangs up. They had made a 70,000% profit. Jones had performed even better than Sun had imagined. In his hands, data for high-risk, high-reward investments. Jones is now ecstatic, thrilled with what had just happened. He's drunk, overjoyed with the outcome, still unable to believe it. In just one single attempt, they had achieved an enormous return. Now they had a huge sum to invest in multi-market trades, with just the two of them. Sun notices his friend won't be sleeping, so they should talk about the future now. Jones, intrigued, asks what glorious insight Sun has about the future. Sun wants to speculate with him about what would happen if Thailand implemented a floating exchange rate. Calling this day D-Day, they would bet everything they had in one single move. During that collapse, prices wouldn't spike. The market would move sideways. No one would want to buy the rotten jackfruit. Jones agrees, switching to a floating rate is essentially admitting defeat. Sun asks Jones how much he thinks 200 million could turn into. Jones is stunned as the boy wants to bet it all. That kind of move won't go unnoticed by investors. If 200 million is bet on the fall of the bot using maximum leverage, it will draw attention. Sun explains they need to leave crumbs for those who come late. The returned one had already said another would declare war. All Jones can think about is that if anything goes wrong with this prediction, they'll lose everything. Betting everything without a hedge is too risky. He can't do it unless he were God. Yet Sun just looks at him with a subtle smile on his face. Sun says they need to gather information for the next day. They have to know what percentage of Thailand's foreign reserves they've targeted with the money they have. Jones says that's not easy information to get, and besides, he wants to know how the boy can calculate such things. Sun thinks the only thing he needs to do is compare it to July 2nd, which had already happened in his previous life. And to be cautious, it could move the operation to the first and reduce leverage. Turning to Jones, Sun asks why he called it a $200 million bet. The remaining 80 million should be enough for them to have a point of contact with the head of the Bank of Thailand. Jones listens to this and becomes even more convinced that there's no way Sun is only about to turn 13. But Sun says Jones needs to head to Bangkok soon. The trader is a bit uneasy, worried that if things go wrong there, he could get knocked down. Sun explains that Thailand must already know the house is about to fall and are likely planning measures to reduce the damage. The year 1997 would be the peak for both of them. They were going all in once again. The next day, Jones was truly anxious, but his gaze was like that of an awakened one about to enter a dungeon. Now that Jones was gathering inside information, it was time for Sun to make preparations in another direction. The hand of the thug holding a knife gets its arm bones shattered. He makes a face like he just bit into a lemon, while Sun's underground fight agent holds him. The thug with the broken arm screams in pain and threatens the boy, but Sun says it's his own fault for pulling out that knife. Sun's agent mentions that the guy is stubborn and even has ties to gangs. Then the thug threatens them again, saying this won't be forgotten. Sun asks if he's telling the truth because if he is, it's fantastic news. The thug doesn't understand why the boy is so happy. Time passes and a group of thugs gathers where Sun is. They ask if the boy really wants to mess with Vasco. If that's the case, his judgment must be pretty poor. The guy with the broken arm says the boy should have run while he had the chance. The truth is, increasing attributes through normal training is too slow. It was time for Sun to check something. Soon, one of the thugs gives the order for the idle ones to finish off the boy. The first one is immediately greeted with a kick to the face, resulting in instant facial disfiguration. He flies through the air like a balloon. The second thug approaches, but his face is flattened by a precise punch. The third is ready to strike with an iron bar, but unfortunately, his chin seems to have a magnet for hands as Sun hits him hard. The fourth one almost makes contact, but Sun easily dodges. He shoves the guy's face with one hand. Finally, one of the anonymous attackers manages to strike Sun in the head with a brick. He believes the blow was effective. Before he has time to react, Sun grabs him by the shirt and throws him to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Sun is a bit injured but pleased because this is the sensation he was seeking. He can see all the openings in their attacks. It's as if the system is begging him to use his combat skills. However, if he were to use Odin's Fury here, things would get really dark. Meanwhile, a smoking thug wonders if his companions are genuine idiots or just pretending very well as they are getting embarrassingly beaten. Deciding he's seen enough, he revs his motorcycle, ready to run Sun over. The vehicle hits Sun head-on, launching his body into the air. He falls to the ground, writhing in pain, while the smoker continues seeking his cancer and orders the fools to finish the boy off. They begin kicking him while he's on the ground, turning the beating into a soccer game, with Sun as the ball. The thug with the broken arm asks them to step aside as he wants to deliver the final blow. Sun is deeply disappointed as none of this has been enough yet. The thug with the broken arm taunts him, saying he's not so tough now. To the surprise of the onlookers, Sun stands up. The thug with the broken arm rushes toward him, intending to land a fatal kick. He strikes Sun's head with such force that it seems the boy is done for. At that moment, Sun's eyes turn scarlet. This was the signal that things were about to get wild. The condition for the man who overcomes adversity had been met. His vitality, which was ranked F, is now ranked E. This thing happened with his strength, dexterity, perception, and Odin's Fury. Now the guy with the broken arm wants to know what that guy is made of. He is very scared and handling his pocket knife, asking him not to come any closer. Faster than he could see, Sun passes by him, leaving him doubled over on the ground as if he were a boomerang. The rest of the thugs are now shaking in their underwear. Sun's wounds were slightly healed, an effect of his ability to overcome adversity. He was just a little confused, adjusting to his senses due to the sudden increase in his attributes. He also isn't feeling any pain. The trembling underwear crew exchange glances. They don't know what to do now. Since they haven't learned anything, they go back to try to attack Sun. He reacts so fast that the first fool didn't take flight only because he didn't have wings. His buddy didn't even understand what happened, and now it's Sun who is too close to him, asking him a hand over the stick. As soon as he gets hold of the club, Sun breaks it over the extra's head. Now he heads toward the delivery guy. Since his patience was shorter than usual, lightning begins to shoot from one of his hands. The biker gets shocked and is ejected from his motorcycle. He falls to the ground, bouncing like a ball. Meanwhile, the motorcycle catches fire. The other idlers and extras want to know who that person is and if he is really human. However, the guy just walked out of there as if nothing had happened. Already in his refuge, the returnee reflects that this ability to overcome adversity isn't activated when he intentionally hurts himself. It only activates if he takes damage from other sources or when he becomes unable to fight. He needs to get used to this, but is certainly very strong. That will be his main weapon for fighting monsters and battling evil and virtues. The phone rings and Sun goes to answer it. It's an international call directed at him. It's Jones on the other end of the line, and Sun is happy that he called before going to sleep. But Jones asks him to stop, ignoring the fact that he is working with a teenager. And as it turns out, Sun was absolutely right. In Bangkok, they acted as if they were already expecting them, and Jones managed to avoid getting shot in the face. From what he found out, they took just over 20% of the foreign exchange reserves. They are very close, and it's not Thailand's situation they're talking about. Thailand still has more foreign currency reserves than they had imagined, so it was impossible to know for sure whether the investors would win that war. Sun says they have already agreed to go all in, but wants to know if Jones has any objections. He says he agreed when he he handed over 80 million just to read the documents he had access to. Regardless of the outcome, everything they do from here on out is completely insane, and he confirms again when D-Day will be, and Sun confirms it's on the 2nd day of July, and this time they will bet with the highest leverage possible. That statement gives Jones chills, as it is complete madness, because if Sun is even slightly correct, they will make a lot of money. Jones points out that this could even cause bad reactions from some investors, but Sun is already aware of that because they are nothing but scammers. As soon as a representative of the Dragon investor acts, the others will follow. The relationship they have is like that of the 8 evils and the 8 virtues with the world hunters. All it takes is a move on the front line, and the followers will come along to create catastrophes. And Jones says that if everything goes well, they will take all the investment funds in the world with a single opportunity. Jones becomes emotional with anxiety as his heart can't handle that situation for much longer. Sun praises him and says that he is stronger than he thinks. He shouldn't worry about that, but prepare to execute his part of the attack plan. And Jones acknowledges that it was a good way to describe what they were doing too, because all the money in the world was under attack now, and they were ready. On July 1st, Hong Kong returned to China. It was as if history was repeating itself. This was a modern version of the Opium War, but instead of opium to weaken the economy, the West shoved dollars. The attack was made with money instead of cannonballs. A civil war broke out in Asia before the regression due to an S-level dungeon that was sealed there. This war was led by one of the 8 virtues and their followers, but the winner of this war now would be someone else. Sun laments that the technology is still rudimentary in this era. He has no other option but to wait for Jones' email. With the leverage, they can operate up to 10 billion at once. Even if they bet everything on the downfall, the opposing faction needs to accept the proposal for the negotiation to proceed, and the Thai market isn't very large. Its volume doesn't exceed 10 billion per day. There's a chance that there simply won't be enough funds to trade. That's why they want to monopolize the breaking position for the next day. Jones' message arrived, the preparations have been made. Sun is happy because now they monopolize that position. The feeling he has is like entering a dungeon with plenty of supplies. He used to enter them without knowing if he would return alive. Now it's different. Luck knocked on his door, and it wasn't even necessary to risk his life for it. The points he accumulated with difficulty won't be wasted due to bad luck. Sun snaps back to reality and realizes he needs to stay calm. Even though he returned only a year ago, it feels like all the madness of his past life had been buried a long time ago. He leans over the keyboard to reply and says that they are now going to destroy a massive dungeon. This statement is directed at himself, so he won't forget his original goal. Don't forget to leave a like so I can keep bringing the next part of this zombie work. But what did you think of this story? Personally, I loved it. A hug to everyone, and see you in the next work, folks.